Good. Okay, so we're all ready now for the next session, and we're delighted to welcome this afternoon David Wilkinson, who's from Durham. He's actually recently has become the principal of St John's College in Durham University, and he's also now more part-time. He's a research lecturer in theology and science in the Department of Theology. And David has written very widely and for many years in the whole field of science religion. He's written this book called Alone in the Universe, which is very relevant to the topic today. And he's brought along a few copies with his own, I think, author's discount. So it's on sale for half price, only £4. So this is a special offer. So I hope many of you will take advantage of that rather excellent offer for a very good book. And David has also written a number of other books, and also has been very involved in the media, in science religion discussions and programs in the media, has been involved in television and radio and so on. So we're delighted that he's just been able to come down from Durham today, and we'll be heading back there soon after the talk. And he's going to talk to us indeed about this search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So thank you.
And thank you for the topic, although I come to the topic with a little bit of hesitation. Giordano Bruno, this guy here, was burnt at the stake in 1600 for speculating about other life and other worlds, or so the story goes. In fact, he was put to death at the stake for rather more heretical beliefs than just a speculation about other life. And I also remember walking through a conference where I was giving a paper on this particular subject, and I could, you know, when you walk past people and you feel that they're nudging each other and pointing at you, you're not too sure what's going on, whether you've got the right clothes on or whatever. But I could hear in the stage whisper, which went from one person to the other, "Look, there's the alien guy." So I'm the alien guy in more ways than one this afternoon. What I want to talk about is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and particularly what may be the religious implications of that search. So we'll do a little bit of the science to begin with, and then we'll look at some of the theological consequences that may or may not be serious. As Paul brilliantly showed, a great deal of speculation that often goes on in the popularization of science and religion actually goes beyond both the science and theology at times, and we just at times have to be a little more cautious and assess the arguments as they come to us. Why is this question important? I think for three initial reasons, if I may suggest to you. The first is that this is an area where science seems to be raising questions which push beyond its own realm. We can see that in a number of places. Some of you may remember August 1996, when the papers went mad about ALH 84001. Not a new American soap opera, but this bit of rock, which NASA conveniently discovered in Antarctica just about the same time that they needed to raise funding for more Mars missions. And this piece of rock was looked at, and NASA argued that these structures were in fact fossilized bacteria. The Daily Mail, a great scientific paper of the British language, called it the greatest scientific breakthrough, this vague orange-coloured smudge. A great theologian, Bill Clinton, hailed the discovery as one of the most stunning insights into our world that science has ever discovered. Even as it promises answers to some of our oldest questions, it poses others even more fundamental. He didn't then go on and tell us what those fundamental questions were, but Dan Goldin, the NASA administrator at the time, said that public excitement about this field is beyond belief. Well, it lasted for a few days, and then in the very, very small print in the scientific journals came the story that most geologists felt that these were geological structures rather than biological structures, but papers like the Daily Mail at that point had lost interest. And so people were left with this sense that perhaps Mars did have primitive life, that it was fossilized in rock like this, ejected from the surface as a asteroid hit the surface, this rock went wandering around the solar system, eventually landed in Antarctica, and we've seen the evidence that the universe is teeming with life, or at least Mars is. And that kind of speculation began to lead to lots of people, Bill Clinton included, talking about whether this posed questions of religious significance. The second reason why I think this question is important is the way that it's presented itself within pop culture, and in particular within science fiction. Whether it be in Star Trek or in Chris Carter's The X-Files, premiered on the Fox network in 1993, science fiction has become more and more popular in television and movies, and indeed in literature. Coupled with the fact that you can now buy anything in terms of scientific merchandise, including Lieutenant Barbie of the Starship Enterprise. And such things have led to interesting scholarly debates. For example, there's a heated scholar debate whether in the Klingon translation of the Bible, Jesus saying, "I am the bread of life," should be rendered, "I am the roqueg blood pie." Now you might say that that's just a bit off the realm of believability. I'm not sure whether it's even more off the realm as landscapes of multi-universes. But this is a growth industry, and the presenting of narrative, of stories, begins to push at the imagination, begins to pose questions. Science fiction is very good at posing questions, picking up and putting into narrative form that which is often talked about within the lecture room. The third area where I think this is important is in the growth of cults or new religious movements. Whether it be the International Raelian movement or the Church of Scientology, beloved of Tom Cruise and John Travolta. Here, science fiction mythology has been woven together with religious belief, sometimes with very severe consequences. So you may remember in 1997, in a $1.6 million mansion near San Diego, 37 members of the Heaven's Gate cult committed suicide. They'd been stimulated by a lot of Star Trek mythology. They'd also been stimulated by a picture that appeared on the internet, which seemed to suggest that behind Comet Hale-Bopp there was a spaceship. The belief was that as they committed suicide, their souls would transcend to the spaceship and go to heaven, Heaven's Gate. As it's 4:30 in the afternoon, well, not quite, but 4 o'clock in the afternoon, let me just entertain you just for a few moments, if that's all right, by showing you a few ways that within popular media the alien narrative has begun to appear. So we'll start with The Simpsons. We'll move on to a movie called Contact, which you remember Carl Sagan's novel of how an alien signal is received from Vega and the response of the world's media to that. And then we'll end up with a peculiarly British comedy series called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, if that's all right.
But first, E.T. phone Homer. Simpson, that is.
Mark, kids, they're about to show my videotape.
Local man Homer Simpson, shown here with his tongue stuck to a lamppost, has given us this videotape. It's a ghost encounter of the blurred kind.
I bring you peace.
The alien has appeared in the same Springfield pasture the past 2 Friday nights. Will it appear again this Friday?
Well, Lise, what do you think about the alien now? I think there must be a more logical explanation, and I think the people of this town aren't going to be won over by 3 seconds of videotape.
I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the alien. Any questions at all. Dr. Hibbert?
Yes, is the alien carbon-based or silicon-based?
The second one. Xylophone. Next question.
Is the alien Santa Claus?
Yes.
There is a possibility. What's that? Life as we know it is universally based on some combination of carbon compounds. But what if life exists based on another element? For instance, silicon. If Atlantis is Mr. Spock, thought of the most. Play the background.
Historic and unprecedented event has occurred. The question of whether or not we are alone in the universe has been answered.
And what happens if they do become hostile? God help us.
God, I hope they bring back elephants! We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
Time's up.
Black. Oh, man.
The president made a brief statement calling the message from Vega one of the most exciting insights into our attendance at religious services has risen a dramatic 39% in recent days.
This piece and 3 German armed divisions clashed with neo-Nazi protesters.
So it turns out there's life on other planets. Boy, this is really going to change this universe contest, don't you think? I mean, gee, we're gonna...
Health officials from around the world are concerned that the message from Vega might trigger a rash of mass suicides, not unlike the recent cult deaths near San Diego.
Even a scientist has to admit that there are some pretty serious religious overtones to all this.
Let's hear from someone whose organization has been accused of conducting its own inquisition in recent days. Richard Rank, head of the Conservative Coalition.
Thank you. This is yet another example of science intruding into matters of faith. Now they will have us
They have been reacting to TV signals
they got from us in the 1930s. They're just getting to see an answer.
Imagine how disappointed they're going to turn out this true. If they're Cubs fans. I mean,
We now take you to Jeremy Wong, who's reporting on events at the Very Large Array near Socorro, New Mexico.
like a bolt from the blue it came. What is being called the message from Vega has caused thousands of believers and non-believers to descend upon the VLA facility here in the remote desert of New Mexico. Many have come to protest, many to pray, but most have come to participate in what has become the best show in town.
Well, I saw the thing coming out of the sky. It had a torn horn and a one-big eye. I remember shaking and I said, ooh-wee. Looks like a purple people eater to me. It was a one-eyed, one-horned, blind purple people eater. Spirits formed from the conscious frequencies and nerve signals picked up from the speech centers in the brain. The practical upshot of which is that if you stick one in your ear, you instantly understand anything said to you in any form of language. The speech you hear decodes the brainwave matrix. Now, such a bizarrely improbable coincidence that anything so mind-bogglingly useful could evolve purely by chance, that many thinkers have chosen to see it as a final and clinching proof of the non-existence of God. The argument runs something like this. I refuse to prove that I exist, says God. Proof denies faith, and without faith I'm nothing. But, says man, the Babel fish is a dead giveaway, isn't it? It proves you exist, and so therefore you don't. You think. Jesus is me. And gets killed on next zebra crossing. Many theologians claim that this argument is a load of dingoes' kidneys. But this didn't stop Ulam Khaluf making a small fortune when he used it as the central theme for his best-selling book. Well, that about wraps it up for God.
Another gentle visitor from the heavens. He came in peace and then died, only to come back to life. And his name was E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. I love that little guy.
Well, we'll pick up some of those themes as we go on. Let's get back to the science for a little bit. What's the scientific motivation for belief in extraterrestrial intelligence? I think it comes in three basic ways. The first is something about the size of the universe, and this is an old argument. It's been used a great deal, and you hear it not just in the scientific lecture room, you hear it down the pub. And that is, there are so many stars in this universe, there must be intelligent life somewhere out there. And so when we look at a universe with 100 billion galaxies, each containing typically 100 billion stars, the argument goes, there must be another planet out there that is possible for life to exist. Now, of course, that argument up to a decade or so ago was a difficult one to make because we didn't know a great deal about how planets, well, we thought we knew how planets form, but we didn't have evidence of extra solar system planets. The last 10 years have been quite a spectacular scientific story in the identification, the observation of extrasolar planets. In 1995, these two astronomers found a planet 51 Pegasi, 48 light years from the Earth, and then over the next 10 years or so, there's been a never-ending story of discoveries of planets, so that our current count is over 100 or so. These are planets outside of our own solar system. This strengthens the argument. If you now have 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and most of them have planets, then you would expect a life-bearing planet to be out there. Of course, in the early days of this was actually quite a difficult argument, in that the planets that were discovered by necessity were very large things. Here we have 70 Virginis, 7.42 times the size of Jupiter. And of course, these planets would be gas giants. It wouldn't be easy to see how life might develop in such an atmosphere as that. Nevertheless, it was argued that if you had such large gas giants, you would have, like our solar system, rocky planets. But we didn't see anything until very recently. And here in April 2007, this is Julius 581, a planet which is significant not just because it's small, 5 times the mass of the Earth, but also a temperature, we think, because of its distance from the star, would be between 0 and 40 degrees. That's very important because that means that most probably water will exist in liquid form on its surface, and that's important to allow the development of life. So we're now beginning to be able to look for and find extrasolar planets of the right size, of the right temperature. The next stage is to look at their atmospheres and to look for the elements in the atmospheres, which will give us a good handle on just how fertile a ground there is in the universe. So the size of the universe. The second was something about the origin of life, and in 1953 in the University of Chicago, classic experiment, Miller and Urey put some gases into a test tube which they thought were the gases that were around at the beginning of primitive Earth, and they put an electric and magnetic discharge through it, lightning and all the rest, and what they found in their test tube was a red-brown sludge. And when they analysed it, they found amino acids. And the argument went that if you could do this in a test tube in the University of Chicago in a very easy way, then surely this should be happening all over the universe. That creating the building blocks of life and then life itself was a very easy thing to happen. And got deep down into both the scientific and public consciousness. The third thing was that I think our technology gave reality to our imagination. People started to talk about flying saucers and alien rockets on the back end of World War II, and our own thinking and doing rocket technology. Today, if you go to the movies and you watch an alien on the movies, it is convincing. Now, I remember in my youth watching television, black and white Flash Gordon television serials. I don't know if any of you ever saw those. You could see how the rockets were strung on white bits of string and how they had fireworks in the back. Let them go. You go to a movie like Men in Black, and here aliens have physicality to them. The digital special effects revolution in Hollywood has given us the ability to visualize these things. And again, that's gone deep into people's psyche. That actually this is a possibility because we've imagined it. Those are the three things: size of the universe, our technology, and also how the building blocks of life are easy. Three arguments against, however. The first is the Goldilocks principle. And we've been hearing a little bit about that already, that things have to be just right for life to exist. And not only in a cosmological arena, but also in a biological arena, a geological arena, there needs to be certain things which are just right. And we know that in a very basic way if we look at our own solar system. We find a number of planets which aren't just right for life. And even if Mars does have some very ancient primitive bacteria, it's probably deep down under the surface, and certainly hasn't developed in anything like the way that it has on the Earth. And so, as well as the fact that you've got a very large universe, you have a large number of factors which narrow down the possibilities. For example, we know that many stars within our own galaxy are in the form of binary stars, two stars in orbit around each other. It's very difficult to imagine a planetary system in a binary system in that sense. So a whole number of Goldilocks principles. Things have to be just right. The second argument against is it's a long way from an amoeba to an accountant. Or maybe not, actually, as the case may be. Here you are, if you begin with the ashes of dead stars, giving you some kind of primeval soup, and you form amino acids, that, of course, is not the end of the story. You need to go through a very complex evolutionary process until eventually you get through intelligence and consciousness to our accountant. Just by producing amino acids does inevitably lead to the development of intelligent, self-conscious life. That may be an obvious thing to say in this kind of audience, but it's a very important thing to remember in this whole debate, that the evolutionary process is very dependent on a whole number of things. the right atmosphere, the fact that your star is stable long enough to allow the evolutionary process to develop. It's a long way from an amoeba to an accountant. There's also considerable difficulty in us even talking these days about the nature of consciousness. I know Daniel Dennett, a number of years ago, wrote a book called Consciousness Explained, as if it was as easy as that. But others are a little more hesitant about it. I like Stuart Sutherland's comment not so long ago, where he said something like, nothing that's ever been written on consciousness is worthy to be read. No one really understands very much about it at all. Well, if that's the case or not, there's a whole amount of complexity going on here and some difficult conceptual understandings before we build the bridge from amino acids up to intelligent self-conscious life. The third argument against is the argument if they existed they would be here. This was an argument coined in the 1950s by a physicist Enrico Fermi. And Fermi's argument, which he gave over lunch one day, was that if the universe was fertile for life, if lots of primitive life was being formed and that was easily developing into intelligent self-conscious life, then we would expect to have seen it already. This argument is a very powerful one. It's an argument about the Star Trek universe. That actually, if there was life everywhere, then within 40 minutes in any direction, you would be able to discover it or see it. Well, you put a few more scientific terms to it. And so let's imagine for a moment a colonization process. Here you have a civilization which is able to travel to different stars. They may begin to colonize their locality, probably using robots that go out and then reproduce by using the raw materials of the worlds that they inhabit. You can begin to model this process and see how it develops. In fact, you can build into this process the fact that some of these probes get lost, some of them return to the place where they started. You can model this quite well, and in fact you can see a way that this happens in human colonization across the Pacific Islands, for example. You can do the calculations reasonably easily, and it's not too different from Fermi's original argument. And Fermi said that in order to colonize our galaxy, then the timescale is 300 million years or so, from one side of the galaxy to the other side of the galaxy. And you might say that's a very long time. Well, actually it's quite a short time compared to the age of the galaxy, around about 10 billion years, or a little more than that. Fermi's argument was that that colonization of the galaxy would have already happened because we are late in the history of the galaxy itself, and therefore we should have seen such colonization. There have been a number of responses to this. Back in the 1950s, Leo Szilard, responding to Fermi's if they existed they would be here, Szilard was a Hungarian physicist. Szilard replied, they are here and they're Hungarians. That was his argument. Carl Sagan famously began to develop the zoo hypothesis, that is that these aliens would keep themselves hidden from us and just inspect us. I mean, I think after such a long journey of millions of years, if you came across another intelligent life form, I think the last thing you'd do is just sit in orbit cloaked. I mean, I would want to go to the White House and have a cup of tea after such a long time. But nevertheless, Sagan argued that. Let's take Szilard's point just for a moment, and we haven't got time to go into the whole X-Files phenomenon. But the last 20 years or so has seen a huge growth in speculation about whether we are a visited planet or not. Kenneth Arnold in 1947, shown here, coined the phrase flying saucers. A reporter talked to him about an unidentified object that he'd seen while flying, and the reporter said to him, it sounds a bit like a flying saucer. Yes, said Arnold, and so the term stuck. The last decade or so has shown many claims of people claiming to have been abducted by aliens. In fact, with respect to any of our American visitors here today, over 4 million Americans claim that they've been abducted by aliens. That's more Americans than can do long division. And quite why aliens would want 4 million Americans to experiment on, I mean, it goes beyond me. Now, we may laugh at cheap jokes like that, and forgive me. John Mack, Harvard psychologist, looked at some of these stories, was disciplined by his school because of that. What can we say about all of this? Let me just pick out one or two brief points. First is that it's an area which is rife with hoaxes. In fact, some of the classic UFO pictures, like this one down here, taken by a man called Billy Meyer, who achieved international fame because of this, are complete hoaxes. They were staged for the money and for the story. There's also the very difficult thing about conspiracies and conspiracy theories. And you'll have heard the conspiracy theories of a crash in New Mexico and the Americans buying alien technology in order to keep the story quiet. A place called Roswell, which is famous for three things: birthplace of Demi Moore, secondly the biggest mozzarella plant in the world, and the third that it was the place where an alien spacecraft crashed. Well, the trouble with conspiracy theories, of course, is that you can try and argue anything with conspiracy theories. You can argue that the Americans used the alien story as a cover over secret spy technology. You can argue this opposite way round. Very difficult to do. And we need to be careful about that. There are those who've talked about how the phenomenon of alien visitation or alien abduction could be caused by a type of sleep paralysis, a type of dream state, halfway between sleeping and being awake, where the intensity of the dream, plus its the sensitivity to your physicality, means that you feel that these things actually have happened. So they're not hoaxes, they're not lies. People actually believe that this has happened. Others have talked about electromagnetic pulses, producing these kind of visions of things. And those within the religious communities have even talked about demonic activity. And I have to say to you, I've spent a little time looking at some of this evidence. I find it interesting for a whole number of reasons, not least that within this postmodern world, here are people arguing about objective evidence, and let me show you that this is true, which is an interesting thing. But I have to say to you that that I don't think any of the stuff is convincing. That's not to say that I don't think that there are things which go beyond our current scientific ability to understand. I think there are certain unidentified flying objects which at the moment lack any scientific explanation or easy, credible explaining away. But nevertheless, to follow the argument through, as I'll try and show in a moment, doesn't quite make sense. And therefore, for what it's worth, taking the Fermi paradox seriously and speculating in a very bold way, I do think for myself that we are alone as intelligent life within this galaxy. Now, that's not to say that there may not be primitive life forms out there. In fact, the universe could be teeming with bacteria. But remember this thing about the popular mind. Because a universe teeming with bacteria would not make Star Trek very interesting. To boldly go to find even more bacteria wouldn't quite work. The fascination for many people is an intelligent life, not just life. The second thing is that I think some of these arguments work for our galaxy, but leave open the question as we come to the universe as a whole. But the fact that there may be intelligent life in another galaxy does have an inherent problem in it. You imagine one of our nearest neighbour galaxies, maybe 2 million light years away from us, having some form of intelligent civilization. They send a message at the speed of light to us saying, hello, is there anyone there in the Milky Way? That takes 2 million years to reach us. If we then send a message back saying, yes, we're here, who are you? That takes another 2 million years to go back to them. That's not a very interesting conversation if you think about it. Now, again, that's a silly illustration, but if you then take the cosmological distances into account, it might be that there is a practical impossibility of us ever knowing whether there's another intelligent civilization out there. It just may be too far away from us for us ever to know. And so we can't be definite about these things, and there's always the problem of communication or the problem of finding. Now, let me move quickly and say if scientific evidence is not conclusive, nonetheless, let's just think a little bit about if extraterrestrial intelligence is discovered, what are the implications for the world's major religions? And some people have done some thinking about this. I'll draw out a few of the implications as you'll find them in some of the literature. The first is an interesting one. And Paul Davies argues that the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence would bolster his claim for cosmic design. Davies writes this: if life is widespread in the universe, it gives us more, not less, reason to believe in cosmic design. Now, his argument goes like this. If life is widespread in the universe, then, picking up the work of Stuart Kauffman and Davis's own interest in this, Paul argues that within the laws of physics themselves is the capacity, the potential, which will lead to intelligent, self-conscious life. And therefore those things have to be in the physics to begin with. And therefore for Davies, it's further evidence of cosmic design. Second implication, in a completely different way, what I might call contact problems for religion. Joel Cornell-Tarter, one of the leading SETI researchers, argues that the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence, far from being a positive thing for religion, would be a very negative thing for religion. Her argument goes like this. She says that religion is destructive to human civilization and is anti-technological advance. That's two assumptions that she begins with. Now you can see where she's going with this. If, therefore, alien intelligent life was discovered and in fact landed on Earth, you would know two things. Firstly, they'd outgrown religion because religion would have been so destructive not to allow their technology to develop. And secondly, they would have brought with them super advanced alien religions, or let's say a religionless philosophy. They would have outgrown religion. And therefore Tarter argues that the major religions of the world may be able to accommodate the idea of extraterrestrials into their current dogma, but some of them may be quite discomforted by the information revealed by the fact of extraterrestrial technologies. You won't be surprised if I say I don't quite buy this. I mean, I think the assumptions that she starts with I'd want to challenge. about religion means destabilization, and technology means progression beyond religion. And of course, for those of you who know a bit about the science-religion debate, you'll know that deeply embedded within a view is a conflict model of the relationship between science and religion, or indeed technology and religion. Third implication that's been drawn: is God an alien? You'll be surprised just to know how widespread this is. Stanley Kubrick wrote, "All the standard attributes assigned to God in our history could equally well be characteristics of biological entities, who billions of years ago were at a stage of development similar to man's own, and developed into something as remote from man as man is remote from the primordial ooze from which he first emerged." Then in 1974, J.F. Blumrick, one of my favourite books, it's always worth a laugh, called The Spaceships of Ezekiel. Blumrick, a NASA engineer, argued that Ezekiel 1 in the Old Testament was actually an account of an alien visitor. And you can see Rodney's laughing at this in the front, but Paul Davis goes for this hook, line and sinker. In Alone in the Universe, Paul's book, he picks up Blumrick's account and reproduces it without comment. And it's obvious that Paul hasn't actually read Ezekiel chapter 1. He goes on from Blumrick, argues this as a possibility. The trouble is, when you start to read the text of Ezekiel chapter 1, you'll find something that a lot of these authors share in common, and that is selectivity in the way that they use the text, and an imposition of Western categories of thought onto an Eastern document. Of course, prime amongst these was Erich von Däniken, who achieved notoriety some years ago and has started to come back into it. Däniken founded a kind of logic of thought which pushed this to extremes, and that is that Jesus became the prime alien. And I've read books where the virgin birth was artificial insemination by an alien. Angels in shining garments are actually aliens in spacesuits. Jesus saying, "In my Father's house are many rooms," can only mean that there are many inhabited worlds in the universe. That miracles such as the feeding of the 5,000 were due to food replicators in Star Trek. And my favourite, that the ascension was simply beam me up, Scotty. I mean, it's a fascinating kind of merging together of science and science fiction and religion. Again, it does very little justice to some of the obvious questions. Just as I pose the question, why would aliens want to abduct 4 million Americans? Then questions such as, when we come to Jesus, why such a life? Why such teaching? Why such a death? And why such a resurrection? These are fairly obvious questions to ask, but rarely picked up upon out of the frenzy to identify Jesus as an alien in some way. Is God an alien? No, but let me just link into something that Paul was talking about, as I noted that this was down Cosmology. And there is a fascinating example of this in a very different field. And this is a paper published by Edward Harrison, distinguished cosmologist. A number of years ago, it was published in the Quarterly Journal of the Royal Astronomical Society, as we had it then. And Harrison picked up on these fine-tuning instances in the universe. And his argument went like this. A fine-tuning of the Big Bang could be because God set it up this way. But, says Harrison, that's not a compelling explanation. Why? Well, in Harrison's view, because if you say it's God, that cuts the discussion short. You can't continue the discussion at all. By the way, condemning 2,000 years of Christian theology into the waste paper bin. Second, well, the anthropic principle, coupled with many worlds, multiverse in what was a very primitive way compared to the way that we've heard it described this afternoon. And Harrison doesn't like that either. He says that such an explanation can explain anything. So he prefers a third explanation. This third explanation is that our universe was created by aliens in another universe through a wormhole, through a black hole. We can't know anything about such aliens because they're in another universe, but nevertheless, this is the explanation of apparent intelligent design. Now, when I first read this, I checked the date of the Quarterly Journal to see whether it was April the 1st, April Fool's Day. Most extraordinary thing to write, but I mean, partly I tell you this because of the desperation around in some sections to get away from God as a way to understand the fine-tuning of the universe. But also how aliens become a convenient way of explanation for a whole number of things. Is God an alien? Fourth, and this is an argument which has been used in this arena, which is to say, would this be the end for the Christian faith? And the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence. Remember, Paul Davis says, I think other life would be a clue to cosmic design, or evidence for cosmic design. But, says Paul, when it comes to the Christian faith, those of you who are Christians, you've got problems for 4 reasons, and you'll find them in this book alone. Are We Alone? The first is, Paul says, you Christians will not be able to understand the nature of human beings. Davis argues that Christian people believe that we are special because we're created by God. But he then goes on to say that a discovery of other intelligent life elsewhere in the universe would undercut that Christian understanding directly. We would not be able to understand why human beings, men and women, are special anymore. I don't buy this at all. And Colin Russell, a number of years ago, pointed out something that was very important. Russell pointed out that, to oversimplify, within Greek philosophy, a Greek understanding of the universe, to be special was associated with place. That is, we were at the centre of Aristotle's universe here. We were in a special place at the centre of the universe, therefore we were special. But Russell said biblical categories of thought say that we are special not because of where we are in the universe, but because of the gift of intimate relationship that God has given to human beings. That gift of grace. And therefore, it doesn't matter where we are in the universe to be special. We're special because of creation and indeed the way that we see that worked out in the life, death and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. That is, when I go and have dinner with my wife and kids, I don't have to sit at the head of the table to know that I'm special and loved. I know that I'm special and loved because of the relationship that I have with my wife and children. And Paul makes that mistake. I think it's quite possible to understand the special nature of human beings in the universe, even if we are not alone. Second problem Davis poses is that Christians would not be able to cope with their understanding of creation. And here, I think with respect, he's just confused. He identifies all Christians as believing in a 7-day creationist picture. But even on that picture, I think God, if he wanted to create in different ways and create different life forms, then he could do that. The third criticism or problem that Paul poses is that of, a little like Joel Cornell taught us, that aliens would bring super advanced alien religions which would supersede biblical Christianity. The trouble with that is, if you know Paul Davis's work, certainly in other areas, you'll know that Davis has very little regard for revelation or religious experience. For him, religion is often defined in philosophical terms, and he wants to marginalize or not take into account revelation or religious experience. Christian faith isn't about simply an advance in philosophical thinking. It's a claim that God has revealed something of himself in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and that we can experience that in experience of the risen Christ. The fourth problem, however, is a very interesting problem. And the problem that he poses here is that you Christians would not be able to fully understand incarnation. What would it mean for the Jesus event if there was other intelligent life in the universe? Now, some Christians have thought about this, not many, but some. E.L. Milne, famous Oxford cosmologist, took the view that the Jesus event could happen only once in terms of Jesus' death on the cross. He wrote, God's most notable intervention in the actual historical process, according to the Christian outlook, was the incarnation. Was this a unique event, or has it been reenacted on each of a countless number of planets? The Christian would recoil in horror from such a conclusion. We cannot imagine the Son of God suffering vicariously on each of a myriad of planets. The Christian would avoid this conclusion by the definite supposition that our planet is in fact unique. What then of the possible denizens of other planets? If the incarnation occurred only on our own, then he concludes, we are in deep waters here in a sea of great mysteries. In fact, Milne argued that if the Jesus event happened once for all, then Christians would eventually need to become cosmic missionaries, taking the gospel throughout the universe. That's a very long missionary journey, if you think about it. E.L. Maskell responded to this and took a different view. Maskell argued that God would take on little green flesh and become incarnate within another civilization, within another life form elsewhere in the universe. And those of you from the British tradition might know that in the 1960s this informed some folk Christianity, including a famous hymn by a man called Sidney Carter, who wrote, "Who can tell what other cradle high above the Milky Way still may rock the King of Heaven on another Christmas Day?" Well, I mean, to begin to untangle some of this is very difficult and yet very important, because it begins to tease out what Christians believe is the incarnation all about. Christians believe that God became a human being to show us what God was all about, but also to deliver us from the fallen, sinful state in which we found ourselves. C.S. Lewis, you might remember, began to speculate about other civilizations that may not be sinful, may not have fallen. And so there's many speculations here as we begin to tease them out. John Polkinghorne was once asked the question whether he believed that God took on little green flesh elsewhere in the universe. And Polkinghorne replied, I don't know the answer to that. But he said, the God that I see in Jesus would do what is necessary. Seems to me that's a reasonable answer to this. Final point, and then I'll be finished, Dennis. Final point, and that is just to say that there are those who've used the search to give religious implications. I'll just draw out two final things. That's religious implications of almost observing the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The first is a very important observation, that there was a motivation, and seems always to have been a motivation in the origins of SETI, which is a religious motivation. Remember Johannes Kepler and his great argument about the moon, that actually the moon's inhabitants inhabitants would be stronger than human beings because of the long, hot lunar days. His speculations about moons didn't stop there. He also speculated about the moons of Jupiter, and he concluded on the basis of the moons of Jupiter that Jupiter was inhabited. Why? His argument went, the moon was created by God for the people on the earth. I observe moons of Jupiter, therefore they must have been created by God for the inhabitants of the surface of Jupiter. It was a prototype religious argument which then was used by Christian Huygens and Richard Bentley, who were some of the first people to look at just how big the universe was. And their argument went like this. Psalm 19 verse 1 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. But we're beginning to discover just how big the universe is. There must be places in this universe that human beings will never see. Therefore, there must be intelligent life out there which will see God's glory reflected in the heavens. Now, it's very interesting. I don't commend the theological argument to you, but nevertheless, these were some of the ways that Christians began to speculate about extraterrestrial worlds. And as Colin Russell points out, they were free to do that because the biblical worldview encouraged them to do so. To begin to look observationally at the universe. And the second thing is the religious dimension within SETI. Now, if you take the scientific picture and couple it together with some of the X-Files fascination, you begin to see a number of themes which religious people often talk about. A sense of what David Hughes calls cosmic loneliness as inherent to SETI. Hughes, a distinguished astronomer and SETI observer, talks about how part of our fascination with the search for extraterrestrial intelligence is the fact that we don't, in Greta Garbo's words, want to be left alone. We actually want to find companionship, relationship. The fear of being alone in this vast universe is something deep within us. And then secondly, the theme of purpose. Why are we here? This is partly Paul Davis's interest in cosmic design. He writes, for those who hope for a deeper purpose beneath physical existence, the presence of extraterrestrial life forms would provide a spectacular boost, implying that we live in a universe that in some sense is getting better and better rather than worse and worse. And then thirdly, a search for identity. Who are we? Can we define ourselves in relationship to something else? Often the way that we form identity. Fourth, a sense of fear, or as someone put it, cosmic vulnerability. If you've seen the science fiction movies like Independence Day with the big spaceships coming, or the Alien movies, they work on this sense of human frailty in the face of vast alien technology in this universe. There's a sense of human vulnerability which we live with. And fifth, the theme of salvation. 1949, Sir Fred Hoyle, in a paper in the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society, wrote, the motivation for believing in extraterrestrial intelligence comes from the hope or the expectation that we are going to be saved from ourselves by some miraculous interstellar intervention. The hope is that there's something out there that's going to save us. As a Christian theologian, there's now a lecture, which is at least an hour long, about how these themes are inherent within the way that the Christian worldview understands the universe, gives comfort, gives hope, gives salvation to human beings. But I would suggest to you that within the search for extraterrestrial intelligence is both a religious motivation and a religious search. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, David. So, right, well, we've got some time for questions and discussion.
Something I didn't feel you touched upon, but actually, I would be very afraid if we were not lonely in the universe. Because actually, you point out quite rightly that at least the Abrahamic religions are not about, demonstration of objective truth, but about revelation. Now, if that is so, which I believe it is, I can imagine if we sort of make contact via SETI, and then sort of send a team away to that planet, with all sort of religious groups tagging along, it would be a quite tense atmosphere, I think, because I can imagine if you arrive there, personally speaking, along with some Jewish astronauts, I would be looking, oh, please, is there sort of people on this planet who sort of have a sort of revelation on a mountain and then had a very rough time throughout history, and then sort of, because I want to see that revelation having some objective truth. I mean, the same thing for Christians. You would want to look, is there within that people, someone who then said, well, I actually am that God incarnate and that was crucified, because that would be highly problematic, because although the revelation of salvation within Christianity or within other religions cannot be demonstrated, you would at least want some verification with other sentient beings, which of course would be also in the image of God.
Yes, I mean, the Roman Catholic theologian Stanley Yaki actually turns that argument upon its head and says that if the little green women and little green men did land on Earth, the religious people should be the first people there to greet them, because they should have something universally in common with other beings within the universe on the basis that this is creation. I think, however, you're right, that it would be a challenging encounter. And this is where, if we begin to move from the underlying principles in SETI and the theological dimensions, we begin to see parallels with the way that people from different faith communities are challenged in their own understanding as they meet others of different faith communities. And that's always both an encouraging and a challenging encounter. As we look for verification, as we look for commonality, as we understand differences, I think it would be a challenging encounter, to say the least. But I think Yaki's right, that there would also be optimism, that one would have common ground on which to talk.
Do you want to come back on that? Or?
Well, that's what we wouldn't know, That's why I think it would be a very tense journey, really, because you would be very afraid. Even atheists, I think, would be very afraid, because if they arrive on that planet and you find a very advanced people and they still have, religious notions, then the whole atheist argument that, the further a civilization gets, religion breaks down, would also end, actually. So it would be, of course, challenging, but I think very frightening on a very deep level.
I'm trying to think whether, if you found a rocket big enough for me to send me up, whether I'd find it fearful. I would just be very excited, I have to say. But I'm partly motivated in that because of my theological conviction that this universe is creation and there is one creator. And therefore, yes, it would be challenging, but I think, I wouldn't be fearful of it. I think theologically I'd be motivated more to excitement.
Catherine, yes, to that.
Do you think you could talk a little bit more about the completeness of the evidence for concluding that, I think you said you thought there probably wasn't, you thought there was probably sufficient evidence to rule out there being intelligent life in this galaxy?
Yes. I don't think there is complete evidence in that sense. I think one has to make almost an intuitive judgment at some point and balance various arguments for and against. The only completeness of evidence would be if we visited all of the solar systems and did our tests, or if we got that signal from Vega, which actually gave us a sense that it was an intelligent signal sent. At the moment, it's a game of playing one argument off against another. Now, this has been codified in the Drake equation, where you can put in your probabilities and come out with an answer between 0 and 1. I have to sound very, very skeptical about the Drake equation in terms of the assumptions that you have to put in order to put the variables into the equation, which leads to the eventual probability. I mean, others are more positive about that, but I think it's a very difficult game to play. It might help you in terms of trying to balance out the arguments, but to give the sense that the Drake equation will give you an answer, I think it's very difficult.
Sure, but I think I would be slightly surprised at the suggestion that there was anywhere near enough evidence to rule out the existence of intelligent life in this galaxy because of the daunting technical challenge that would be involved to monitor many, many stars in this galaxy along any given line of sight. The incredibly precise astrometric requirements, plus how very low the signals would be against the noise from the pulsars ticking away and stars in orbit,
or even knowing
so
what
forth.
frequency to look at.
Precisely. I mean, I was a little surprised to hear you say, if you did actually say this, that you thought the weight of evidence did suggest that there wasn't intelligent life in this galaxy, because I don't think we've at all searched parameter space in a way that we could draw that conclusion.
I mean, I didn't say. I hope I didn't say that it was ruled out. For me, the weight of evidence, particularly in terms of the Fermi argument, is strong, and that's all I'd want to say. Which means I move against believing that there's intelligent life in our galaxy. But you're quite right. I mean, we haven't explored anything like the parameter space in terms of messages that we might receive, or indeed stray radio waves that we might find.
Sure. I mean, for someone on the other side of the galaxy, looking back at Earth, we would be very hard to observe because of all the confusion in a technical sense in the way.
Oh, absolutely. And the Fermi paradox only works on the basis that an inevitable stage of development is a program of colonization.
And we're not in the business of colonizing.
Not yet. Not yet. Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan argued against that. His get-out clause for the Fermi paradox was to say that, in fact, the move to technological advancement of colonization, space colonization, was not inevitable. But Frank Tipler, John Barrow make a very strong argument against it, on the basis that that it is a step of discovery for any civilization. But you're quite right. I mean, if we stay in our little backwater here on the Earth, and the only way that we could be seen is by stray television programs or radio waves going out, it'd be very, very difficult to see us.
Because many of those signals will remain trapped within our own atmosphere.
Absolutely.
It seems to me that the distances involved just within our own galaxy are so immense, given none of us are in the business of believing that we can travel at a speed comparable with the speed of light. I can't see that civilizations not having conquered part of the galaxy is at all a strong argument.
Fair enough in that sense. Although, the Fermi paradox is not based on close to speed of light colonization.
Given those the speeds you'd have to travel at to make a serious impact on the galaxy. Given the size scales involved.
Yeah, 300 million years is based on something like travel at 1/10 of the speed of light. Now, if you actually can travel quicker, some people think that you can colonize in 3 million years rather than 300 million years. So 300 million years is often the upper limit to the Fermi paradox. But yeah, Dharma.
Yes.
There's, I guess, intensely speculative question, but assuming there could be some kind of contact, and assuming the assumption of a loving God who lovingly communicates through Scripture, just as speculation, do you feel that God would have to, in some sense, prophetically mention this in Scripture for salvation history, given the possibly cataclysmic nature of the contact? I mean, we're assuming that these are just all good beings or something, and the fact there's maybe no reference to this. I mean, maybe not necessarily. I guess we'd have enough of their own scriptural tradition to be able to handle the encounter, hopefully, well. But
it's a good point. I mean, as you've heard me say, I'm not going to get the get out clause and say, well, actually, Jesus did say about Father's house, many rooms, and all the rest of it. I just don't think. I don't think it's there. I think there are enough scriptural principles for us to deal with the encounter. Those of us in the Christian faith community. But it is interesting that your point is very well made. Such a cataclysmic discovery, in some ways.
Well, like finding a rock, you know.
That's right. But remember, I mean, Scripture is anthropocentric in the right sense, in telling salvation history, with a cosmic dimension, and yet, in terms of God's purposes with human beings. And therefore, yeah, won't worry me too much, but a fair point.
Yes.
Just in response to that, isn't the Greek for world at the end of the Great Commission cosmos anyway? So doesn't that cover it? But what I was going to ask, I think you may have answered, but in the slide where you talked about the weight of evidence, you had previously mentioned the Fermi argument, but also the improbability of all the just right conditions. And obviously the Fermi argument doesn't work with other galaxies because of the vast distances involved. But if you were convinced by the improbability of all the just right conditions, wouldn't that apply to the other galaxies as well?
Yes, it would. And what's interesting in the scientists who talk about this is that physicists are far more optimistic than biologists about the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence. Most of the physicists that I talk to are really very positive about the possibility there's something out there, not least because we haven't explored the parameter space in order to rule it out. A great number, not all, great number of the biologists are very skeptical because of the very sensitive nature of the evolutionary process. So it's an interesting contrast. And yes, I think, as I say, the Fermi paradox for me is more powerful than the biological arguments, but that's, again, because I'm a physicist rather than a biologist. I don't understand a great deal of biology.
Yes.
Given that we've got no indication whether, if there are aliens, whether they're friendly or unfriendly, should we shout or should we sit passively listening and waiting? You get what I'm saying?
I do, absolutely. And again, I mean, there have been those who would make that argument very strongly, that any attempt to contact extraterrestrial intelligence has huge dangers for civilization because of that. Again, I'm less worried at that. I think, and that again is a theological sense, but I hope a realistic theological sense. I do believe in a creation which is good, but I also believe in a creation in which freedom, the gift of freedom, gives us the opportunity to turn against God's will and sin. And therefore, within human relationships and within human relationships with nature, the created order, there is always that sense of abuse and disruption and oppression and violence, which is a reality. Does that mean that I'm not prepared to take risk
no. Means that I need to be realistic about risk. But my excitement of discovering the answer to the question is far more positive than the worry about what might happen to a fair point.
Certainly, I mean, if you look at human history on Earth, I'm not sure if I can think of any episode of colonization that went well for those being colonized.
That's true. That's true. And well, absolutely, or for those who were the colonizers as well in the longer term. Does one therefore conclude that isolationism is the only way to live? And I think there's a sense in which the diversity that I see within human communities is ultimately enriching, because that's a reflection of the diversity that God has put into creation. And I am not fully human until I experience that diversity. Now, the way that I carry on the relationship may be that I abuse the possibility of that diversity, or I use those relationships for my own ends. But the alternative, isolationism, I don't think is about what makes us human. Now, if one talks about this in a cosmic sense, I mean, we're stacking up speculations here, one on top of the other, aren't we? But there is a sense in which we have to think about ourselves as human beings in the whole of creation, and that means cosmos, not just planet Earth. Because even if there isn't intelligent life out there, it seems to me that, depending on how much timescale we have ahead of us, we will begin to colonize on a smaller scale. And the movement to terraforming and taking over other worlds for our own purposes, particularly as if this environment becomes worse and worse and worse, is a realistic possibility. And the ethics of how we work that out are very important. Yes.
Kind of going back to the Fermi paradox, and one kind of very obvious assumption in that is that this intelligent colonizing species has a civilization that lasts for long enough to do so. Now, if we're using humans as a benchmark, given the scares we've had with nuclear weapons and now with global warming, is it reasonable to expect that such a civilization won't destroy itself before it has time to do this colonizing?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And there is a body of literature now about that. Martin Rees's, one of his most recent books, which is not very good bedtime reading because it charts the threats to human destruction. Read one threat a night for 7 days of the week, and it's just very depressing how we're going to wipe ourselves out. John Leslie, the philosopher, on a book in which he talks about an argument which says that we will wipe ourselves out because we're at a particular time. I mean, these are very important arguments. I mean, the trouble with speculating into the future is it is speculation, and I think we have a responsibility to live well now in the light of the future that God promises or God presents to us. But whether we wipe ourselves out or not, others, sorry, I'm rambling on, forgive me, I'm waffling on. There's such rich questions. Others have argued that colonization is stimulated by the motive of spreading yourself out throughout the universe, so that if one world destroys itself, you're all right, human civilization will continue. So there are some who've actually argued that we should be colonizing in order that we don't become vulnerable to one world wiping itself out.
Stephen Hawking actually gave a talk about a year ago in Hong Kong. Says exactly that.
Yeah. Thank you. Good. I think probably we'll have a bit of a comfort break. I think I just want to say a couple of things, and then we'll have a short break, and then it'll be Rodney Hollis' talk at 1:30. First of all, I think we really want to thank David for a very fascinating talk, and the movies as well. So thank you, David.